the prelude to Pearl Harbour, which I've written about, which I've developed and explored. It's called The Sinking of the Sydney, and that was the name of the boat that sank. Now, if that evidence is put out onto a format, you can see, well, the Americans knew that the Japanese were coming. They knew they were going to lose thousands of men, but they knew that if they lost their flat tops, they were finished. They couldn't fight the Japanese. So the day before, or 2 days before Pearl Harbour, they all left. You know, the 4 flat tops left Pearl Harbour. Yeah, and all the First World War battleships that were left in Battleship Row were hit by the Japanese, which is very convenient, really. They wanted to build a whole new fleet of battleships, and this gave them an excuse. This gave them the public opinion which they needed. They needed that public outrage to be able to justify these excuses. Exactly the same as 9/11, same scenario. You know, you think of the military expenditure after 9/11, it's gone ballistic. It's gone ballistic. And it's all about that. It's all about, you know, so every time there's a bit of a lull in peace and you think everything's looking as though they're going to sort the world out, something else happens. Ukraine happens is the recent thing. You look at, you know, we're told that these wicked Russians have been pushing the Ukrainians into this situation, and it's nothing to do with it. It's the EU in partnership with NATO are trying to muscle in. You know, NATO and the EU and the United States made a commitment to the Russians. When you abandon the Soviet Union, all those states through Central Europe, which you occupied as a buffer against, they don't want anything like the Second World War ever to happen again. 30 million people got killed because they had no protection. They didn't want that to happen again. So that's why they occupied those Eastern European countries. You know, it was nothing to do with Russian expansionism. They're not an expansionist nation. They're not interested in that. You know, America's got 1,000 bases throughout the world. Russia's got 4 or 5. You know, it's an insane situation that our press are developing this amazing situation that is totally untrue, but it serves the purpose of the establishment. And that's where we are. And this program about sinking of the Sydney is so blatant, and you can see it, and we've got the testimony of some of the survivors, and there's the evidence that exists. And a wonderful book was written by the son of the radio operator on the Sydney. It's incidentally, which is another fascinating fact, it's the only British cruiser to have lost every man on board during the sinking. Every man. Not yet. There were nearly all the survivors off the. You see, what happened was, according to the official version of events, HMS Sydney was steaming quite close to the Hawaiian Islands when it saw a German raider called the Cormorant, and it approached to verify the raider, which had the disguise of a Norwegian tramp steamer. But they smelt a bit of a rat, but approached it. But a cruiser against a little freighter, there was no contest. And the cruiser had all her guns on, and she approached. But there were a couple of other mysteries. Why didn't they send up an aeroplane? They had an aeroplane, they could have done that. But I think they were just thought, well, this is insignificant. But they approached it, and it turned out to be a raider. And as soon as they got within range, the raider dropped its disguise and fired off a volley of torpedoes at the ship. Now, it caught fire. The Sydney caught fire, but the exchange of volleys, it sank the Cormorant instantly. The Cormorant sank. And virtually all the Cormorant's crew survived. Virtually all the Cormorant's crew survived. And they were the ones among whom we found Japanese milk bottles. So there's all this thing about, well, how could a raider sink a ship that had won all this applause for virtually sinking the Italian Navy single-handedly? An amazing ship. It had been given the freedom of the city, and it was an amazing warship, this. And that was sunk by a modest little raider, and there were no survivors. And that's a staggering fact, and it's the only ship in the Second World War for this to happen. But the exchange of the correspondence between Churchill and Roosevelt doesn't is still secret. I can't get hold of that, because obviously what happened was they didn't want that information to come out, because if the defenders in Pearl Harbour did discover there was a belligerent fleet en route, they would have been prepared. They would have been ready for it. But that wouldn't have suited the cause to get the Americans into the Second World War. They had to be a surprise. It had to be a surprise, just like 9/11 had to be a surprise, even though everybody knew it was going to happen in the intelligence community. So there's an awful lot of darkness going on in these elevated areas.